Hello, this is Tiger Slash Second, and today we're going to be having a look at this. This is a Ravager. You might be familiar with it from every single Dark Eldar list posted online. This is another Ravager. It broke when it fell off of a table and was cobbled together by its previous owner. And, here's another one. It's been through a bit of damage. This sail is being held on with the slightest amount of glue right now. Clearly someone wasn't taking very good care of these before I bought them, and then I didn't take very good care of them either. This video is kind of a twofer. I'm going to discuss the Ravager in detail, but also the joys of buying second-hand models. The model discussion is going to be broken into 3 parts. First, a bit about the model itself, then its options, and finally how it can be used. So, what about the Ravager? It is a Raider with sponsons. That's pretty much it. These models specifically I picked up from my friendly local game store. They always have loads of used models for sale, and they usually offer a decent discount, so I figured, why the heck not? This was back in the shortage, the Great Ravager shortage of 2017, 2016, the late 7th edition, early 8th edition. And these guys were only $25 a piece, which was at the time quite a bargain. Originally they were painted in 3 color minimums and had really fuzzy primer job and just basically weren't much to look at. You just getting the models. And then I went ahead and painted them up, spruced them up a bit. Gotta get a bit of crew on there still. This one though, these two were just poorly assembled, very basically painted. Still haven't done much to them. This one a bit more than the other, but you can see, especially on this metal, if I can get the camera to focus. There we go. That is some fuzzy metal right there. That's the dangers you run into with those bad primers. Personally, I noticed that Army Painter, the brand, is the worst offender when it comes to fuzzy primer. I always use either the GW products or P3 myself. But this one here looks like it fell off of a table and someone very cleverly decided to put it back together. Originally these sponsons here were glued on, but I just put some magnets on there, so now I can turn it into a Raider whenever I want. And I am particularly fond of this little character carrying the front gun. Some of these damaged models that I end up putting back together, they end up being some of my favorites because they always have a little bit of character, either something that the previous owner brings to the table or something that you end up putting into the model when you're trying to put it back together. The downside though is, of course, you can find models that were used and fixed poorly. This Raider with the Ravager rather, with the sail, you can't tell, and I'm not going to touch it in case it breaks, but this sail is currently being held on with the slightest bit of plastic glue. This is the 3rd time I have tried to repair it because evidently the previous owner had broken the sail themselves, and their response was to apply super glue to try and hold it back together. The super glue worked until it didn't, and then when it didn't, it made trying to plastic glue it back together a lot harder. And I like plastic glue because it gets a better bond, but I've had to apply a file and hobby knife over and over again to that sail to try and find the plastics so that the plastic glue can get a little bit of bite and hopefully hold that thing on a little sturdier. So enough about that. On to the unit itself. The Ravager is a toughness 6 gunboat built on the Raider platform. It sacrifices its ability to carry passengers in order to equip a couple of these sponsons with 2 more heavy weapon armaments. This process also apparently involves some kind of evil elf magic that prevents it from aligning itself with witch cults or homunculus covens, meaning, unlike the raider on which it's built, Ravagers can only be taken by cabals. Stats-wise, virtually everything else is identical to the transport counterpart, including the number of wounds, the speed, even the weapon options. Dark Lances are more expensive and less reliable in spite of their higher strength and the additional -1 AP over Disintegrators, so Disintegrators are universally how these are equipped. As far as deployment and tactics go, typically you'll see 3 Ravagers brought either as a Cabal battalion or a spearhead detachment, with an Archon sitting in the middle. This Archon is usually equipped with the Writ of the Living Muse, as is the war gear relic for the Black Heart Cabal. So the Ravagers are almost universally Black Heart Cabal. You play them by having them shuffle around a little bit around the Archon, who really can't move that fast, picking 3 targets, or 1 target 3 times in a row, shooting the snot out of it, and repeating this process 5 to 7 times in a row. Do this enough and you win the game, basically. At least that's how the internet tells it. So there you have it, Dark Eldar Ravager. Alright, so what do I really think? Why is it so good? Is it so good? I mean, of course it's good, but I don't think it's for the reasons most people say it is. So many Dark Eldar players swear it's undercosted and too powerful and that Disintegrators are too cheap, and maybe they are. And honestly, if it was up to me, I'd swap the points between a Disintegrator and a Dark Lance, but that's beside the point. Really, none of these are the reasons why the Ravager appears to be so darned reliable. And I say reliable instead of overpowered for a reason. The Ravager, unlike virtually every other unit in our army, pigeonholes itself into a single effective style of play. You get 3 of them, you give them Disintegrators orbiting an Archon for rerolling 1s, and you shoot stuff that is 36 inches away. This playstyle takes all the broad methods usually available to Dark Eldar armies and boils them down into one singular tactic. Sure, you can move your Ravagers up to 14 inches without advancing, but that Archon can only go 7 inches. Maybe a little more if it advances, but your boats don't want to go too far away from it and lose the rerolls. Sure, you can take other Cabals other than Blackheart, but then you miss out on rerolling 1s, which is a very obvious advantage. And most of the meta right now seems to be consisting of Night Titans, which, the Blackheart Cabal is the best against. So, yeah, you're going to run Blackheart Cabal. So what you end up with, after all of this comes out in the wash, is what's basically a static, long-range, heavy weapons platform that you always get your points out of. It's really hard to screw it up because it performs virtually identically in the hands of both veteran and beginner players. It has a very low amount of tactical depth, and there's not a lot of maneuverability you need to, worry about. So, yeah, it's just a base level of good that doesn't really curve up or down. The real question, though, is why it seems so good in relation to other Dark Eldar units. I would say that's because most of our other units require things that make them good. Tactical thinking, stratagem use, weapon selections that aren't just the same thing repeated 3 times, movement and terrain advantages, etc. None of these things really matter with a trio of Ravagers. You can just kind of keep them at the end of their range and blow a thing or 2 off the board a turn. Ravagers aren't really any better than Razorwing jet fighters, but they can take continuous advantage of the rerolls, and they miss out on the -1 to hit. Those rerolls necessitate bringing an Archon, an unimpressive unit which starts north of 70 points, but because the Archon buffs everything within 6 inches, the sunk cost of the reroll buff gets diminished proportionally the more units you have near it, so you end up with the opposite of diminishing returns. That is, the more Ravagers you bring, the more effective the Archon becomes for its points, and what you really want is to have the Archon pay for itself. This is why the Ravager is so good. It's the end result of math hammering the codex. So do they have limitations or counters? Yeah, of course they do. Every unit has a counter. Ironically, for the Ravager, it's other long-range shooting. Close combat is an effective tool against them, but their Overwatch can be surprisingly dangerous. I personally have seen 2-each sorcerers get absolutely punked by a single Ravager overwatching it with rerolls. What's more, they need to be hit pretty hard in order to take them out in a single round of combat. Remember, these guys do have a 4-up armor save. They are toughness 6, and they do have 10 wounds. That's pretty difficult for anything short of a smash captain to do in one round of close combat. The real danger, though, is long-range heavy firepower, especially against opponents that know what they're doing. Baiting a Dark Eldar player into blowing their -1 to hit stratagem on one Ravager, while then targeting the other two, that can have you losing a large portion of your firepower very early. They don't even need to kill all the gunboats, because once they're taken down a single bracket, you've already lost a significant portion of your long-range firepower. It's also a lot easier to do 5 damage to these platforms than you think, especially if you're going up against something like Helver Night Titans, which in a shootout will win against the Ravagers. They cost more, of course, but their firepower and toughness justify it. Fortunately, playing Ravagers is easy. You just need to be smart about your targets, prioritize your opponent's firepower, and don't be afraid to move out of danger, even if it means sacrificing your rerolls. Because, I don't know about you, but I would rather have a Ravager that's alive and not rerolling ones than one that is dead. So, as I said, it's really easy to run these effectively for people newer to Dark Eldar, and it's a straightforward way to get effective firepower in your lists. Small wonder almost every Dark Eldar tournament list features 3 of them. Recently, in spite of the fact that I like to go a little counter-meta, I've been incorporating a couple of them into my brigade lists, although without the benefit of their obsessions. So, that's my take on the Ravager, a solid all-rounder workhorse that's effective, but not really as broken as everyone says.